Thank you all for braving the rain tonight and coming out to attend our event, the ABCs of Accessory Dwelling Units. My name is David Fung. I'm a planning commissioner here in Cupertino and a longtime resident, and I'll be your moderator tonight. I'd like to start off by thanking the City of Cupertino and the Cupertino Chamber of Commerce for hosting this night's event. And we also want to give some special thanks to Rick Kitson from the Chamber who helped organize this. ADUs have received a lot of press lately due to changes in state law that ease some of the traditional restrictions on building. But the concept of converting unused space in your home or yard for rental income is an old idea. Today, adding an ADU can also be a social statement, allowing you to take an individual action to help address the shortage of housing in our community. It's no news to anybody that the prosperity of Silicon Valley brings growing pains as well. Housing here is unavailable and unaffordable, spawning traffic congestion and environmental impacts. We're in our 9th straight year of economic growth since the recession, but our production of jobs has outpaced housing production for 40 years now. That's a deep hole to climb out of. Creating a better balance of housing is a major effort that cuts across state, regional, and local planning. Meeting this challenge is not a win-or-lose situation where we're looking for a silver bullet. It really requires many different options that operate in concert for us to make headway. For all the tools in the toolbox, ADUs may be the smallest and most delicate, as it just adds single units dispersed through town. With around 12,000 single-family homes currently in Cupertino, if just a few percent added an ADU, this would represent hundreds of additional dwellings with low community impact. We're fortunate to have a knowledgeable and experienced panel tonight, so let me kind of lay out how we're going to organize this. We'll start by looking at policy issues around ADUs and housing. The statewide changes to ADU regulations are driven by our housing crisis. Next, we'll take a look at the design specifics of ADUs. We'll cover the different kinds of ADUs, how to determine whether you can add an ADU to your property, allowable sizes, and learn about permits and fees. After that, a builder who's actively building ADUs in our area will talk about architectural design and tips to have a successful project. Finally, it's fun to build stuff, but you have to pay for it too. We'll look at the financial side of building and renting an ADU and some investment options that an ADU can bring you. We'll also take a look at an example of a new program that can help fund an ADU in exchange for housing a school employee. After these presentations, the entire panel will participate in a Q&A session, and we'll welcome questions from the audience at that time. So, let's get going. Our first speaker today, we'll start by taking a look at policy issues around the housing crisis, which is the genesis of all these ADU changes. I'm pleased to introduce City Council member and former Cupertino Mayor Rod Sinks. Rod has served on the council since 2011 and on many regional administrative groups, including, and not limited to, the Bay Area Air Quality Management Board, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Board, and the VTA 85 Corridor Policy Advisory Board. In the coming year, Rod will serve as president of the Cities Association of Santa Clara County. There's no better resource to gain a regional understanding of the challenges before us. So please welcome Rod Sinks. Sure.
Thank you. Let's see here. Can you hear me? Good. I want to be sure we get recorded here because the City Channel has kindly agreed to record us tonight. We appreciate everybody coming out in the rain, and we know that for everybody that sits in this room very typically, we have about 10 times as much viewership. So hopefully if this program is of interest to you and you share it with your neighbors, we'll expand our reach. So we appreciate your consideration in reaching out to those who you think might be interested in this topic. So let's see, do we have the first slide up? I can't quite see.
Housing needs?
Yeah. That's what's showing there? I can't quite, okay. So let me frame this by saying many of our local government agencies now consider housing to be a crisis, lack of affordable housing. And that's true at the state level, it's true at the local level, it's true within the county, it's true for the Cities Association. And what do we mean by that? How many of you have or have had kids in the Cupertino schools, or the schools that Cupertino and others are shared? So most of you, right? How many of you came to Cupertino because of the schools, and you paid that premium to live here? And how many, when you sell your house, think you're going to sell to somebody that cares about the value that the schools are bringing? Yeah, I think that's a pretty common sentiment. We recognize that the schools are a prime driver in why people come here. So in September 2017, a one-bedroom unit here was renting for $4,000, a two-bedroom unit for $5,000. Our median home value has now reached $1.9 million, okay? So we just talked about schools. We have an issue with not the students. Students are still coming to schools, although things are getting expensive enough that we've seen enrollment dropping at CUSD, several hundred. And that's a big problem for us because CUSD is funded on a per pupil basis. So to cover the fixed cost, dropping student enrollment is a big problem for them. But I'll give you one little fact. Our high school district has recently surveyed teachers, and they're still working out the details of the survey to make sure that they have statistically valid results. But here's one undisputable fact. More than half the teachers that serve the Fremont Union High School District are renters. Of those who are renting, again, more than half of those, the vast majority of those teachers say they're moving out within 6 years because they can't afford to live here. They're not willing to deal with the commute. They're going to go find a job in a more affordable place. So today, for example, if a teacher comes from South County, Gilroy, Morgan Hill, has to fight her way up Highway 85, 2-hour commute in stop-and-go traffic, each way, every day, you can imagine why a teacher would say, you know, Cupertino, I'd love to live there, but honestly, it's all too expensive. And I just got a job in San Martin or Gilroy or Salinas or Oregon, and I'm out of here. Now, if that's not enough of an incentive for you to think about why the topic of housing is important, I can't imagine what would be. But that hits home for me personally because my kids went through the schools here, and I know that a large component of the value of my home is really thanks to the fine school districts that we have here, the public school districts that serve all of our kids. So, if I take this up to the state level for a moment, the state has long worked to incent all of the cities in the Bay Area to build more housing. There's something called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA. They define an 8-year period. The current cycle we're in goes from 2014 to 2022. Okay? And they told us at the beginning of this cycle that we needed to find a place for 1,064 housing units. And they said because we're not confident you can, if all you allocate is that, you need to up that allocation. So you need to actually find specific locations to build 1,400 units of new housing in Cupertino. So we had to have a specific plan defining each of the sites on which we could build a total of 1,400 units by the end of the RHNA allocation. So we did that process at the end of 2014. Okay. So we placed things, a lot of it, 600 units got put at the Hamptons, which is already a site of some 342 units. So the Hamptons, when rebuilt, will be 942 units. It sits right next to Apple Campus 2, reports to the Santa Clara Unified School District. And because it's right near the freeway and because it's right next to Apple Campus 2, now dubbed Apple Park, we think there's going to be big benefit there. And then we sprinkled the housing around east and west and north and south to try to give some geographic distribution to it. So let's talk about how we specifically help those who can't afford a $1.9 million home or rents of $4,000 or $5,000. Teachers here in the high school district earn from $62,000 to start up to $112,000. Okay. What the state has induced with the RENA cycle is a tiered layer of market rate housing, that is housing that commands whatever the market will bear, the $4,000 or $5,000 that I talked about. And then moderate income, which right now is $91,000 to $136,000. Okay, so teachers fall at the low end of that range and dropping into the next category, which is low, and then there's very low and so forth. And we have an obligation to the state to build all those housing units. So the Cupertino has been working on this problem a long time of trying to get low-income housing. We have a program that says 15% of the housing units for any project have to be affordable, right, in various categories. And we've imposed housing impact fees on developers over time, collecting money across all forms of development, office development, retail development, as well as market rate housing, to help us assemble the money that it takes to actually build the units. Because, yeah, land is expensive here, right? So we got a fair amount of inclusionary housing that is within the project, for example, at the Hamptons. Yeah, I think we're ready for the next one. So that moderate income level, right, gives you some idea. The number there was 231. So the housing element, it's called, or this RENA allocation, one of our tools for building more affordable housing are smaller units. And an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, is a smaller unit that sits in your backyard or my backyard or his backyard and gives direct separate access to somebody who would rent that from you as the landowner or the homeowner. When you get ready to sell your home, that ADU becomes part of that sale. You're not selling it separately. It's not just a flag lot. So there's no subdivision. We are doing pretty well toward our RENA moderate housing compliance. For this period, we're expected to do 32 units. And we've actually issued permits before the start of this year for 28, and then since the start of the year, 8 permits. State law has recently changed, requiring that cities adopt an ADU policy. So our council's done that. And as you'll hear from the other speakers, we have a good program, and we are eager to encourage people to consider adding an ADU onto their property. And frankly, we think we have a program that ought to be in your interest as a homeowner, as a landowner, and also offers benefits to the community. So with that, we'll move to the next speaker.
Thank you, Rod. Our next speaker is John Mateer. Let's take for our next step here, let's take a nuts and bolts view of the rules and regulations associated around building an ADU. Can I have one at my house? How big can it be? How small can it be? John is an associate planner here in the planning division of the city of the Cupertino, and his job scope includes ADU applications here in Cupertino. John.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, one of the many things I do is ADU applications in the city, as do many of my colleagues also. Specifically, myself and another colleague of mine, we were charged with updating our ordinance to be consistent with state law. And if just a brief history of it, Governor Brown signed the Senate and House bills, the Senate bills and Assembly bills in September of 2016, and it was charged that every city in California had to have their ordinance in place by January 1st, 2017. So like many other cities across the state, we were scrambling very hard to comply with the state. Otherwise, if we didn't, the state's laws on ADUs would take effect rather than our local laws themselves. Within the last year, we've come back to council with a couple revisions, and most of the times it was to comply even further with the ADU standards. One of the things about Cupertino's history with ADUs is that we've always been one of the more liberal cities in terms of approving them. We never required planning entitlements for them. It was always just a building permit process. As long as you met zoning and building code, you were fine to go in without having to go through planning at all. And that's pretty evident. We started tracking ADU building permits starting about 2009, and since then, as you saw from a couple slides ago, we've been averaging about 9 a year, which is on the high end, where I think San Jose averages about 20 some odd a year. Of course, they're a much larger city, but some comparable cities like Sunnyvale and Palo Alto only average as low as 2 a year. I think Saratoga's on even lower than that with 1 a year. So we're doing pretty good. We're doing pretty good as a city in terms of encouraging these types of units to be developed and whatnot. Next slide to the accessory dwelling unit size. There we go. Thank you. One of the things that changed earlier this year was how we calculated the size of accessory dwelling units. We do have a minimum size. You can't be smaller than 150 square feet. But we do have a maximum size, and that's based on a few things. Mostly the size of your lot determines the size of your ADU. We cap it out about 1,000 square feet, but there's other variables too. It's very formulaic. So let's say, for example, you have an 8,000 square foot lot. So pretty much you're capped at 10% of the size of your lot, so about 800 square feet. But if your home on your lot's, let's say 1,700 square feet, you're capped to 50% of the size of the living space of that of your house. Now, living space, or definition of living space, is basically consistent with the state's definition, which means the size of your home minus the garage of that. So let's say if it's a 2,000 square foot house, your garage is 400 square feet, your living space is 1,600. Multiply that by 50%, you get 800 square foot max, so on and so forth. So there's a few ways to look at how the maximums of your house on your ADU go about. Now, there's a few different types of ADUs. Yes, the one we think about is the granny unit, the accessory unit, the one that's in the backyard, in the corner where you throw your mother-in-law and have her stay there, and she comes in when they eat, but she has her independence, or his or her independence, out there in the corner. There's also ADUs that are also attached to your home. Now, we have a lot of applicants who want to attach it to their principal dwelling unit just because you might have an elderly family member who needs that companionship, who needs to be really close by. They can just open the door and walk through to their family's house, but yet still have the independence that they have, that separation, so they can live their own life, have their own kitchen, etc. And then with that attached, we also have a category called internal conversions. Now, internal conversions are basically when you build the ADU, you're not expanding the footprint of your home. Rather, you're converting your extra living room that no one uses anymore into a living space where you have a bathroom, you have a kitchen, but it's still walled off from the rest of the house. Next slide. When the state last year made it easier to develop, the biggest change to our ordinance were the parking standards. Now, single-family homes in this city have to have 2 covered spaces and 2 uncovered spaces, which is pretty onerous compared to most cities, to be truthful. But what the state did was say, well, we will lessen the city's standards for requiring parking for people who want to develop an ADU. So a couple of those things were, it gave flexibility for those who want to convert their garages to accessory dwelling units. Okay, so for example, in this city, if someone living in Rancho wanted to convert their garage into an ADU, that's fine, as long as they can provide those 2 spaces, those 4 spaces on site. What the state said further was that, okay, those 2 spaces they took away don't have to be covered. They can be tandem, and they can be any configuration as long as they can provide those 4 spaces. So if you have 2 spaces in your driveway and you're able to put 2 spaces in your rear yard, that meets the criteria. Okay. Another example is that if someone adds a detached accessory unit and there's only 1 covered space and 2 uncovered spaces, our code now has to say that they are exempt from providing that extra covered space if they live within 1 mile of public transit. And how we define it as staff in the city is that can just be a regular bus stop. If you're in an architecturally significant district, so like Fairgrove would be an example, part of an existing primary residence or existing accessory structure, you're basically doing an internal conversion. Parking permits are required but not offered to those within the accessory dwelling unit. And there's a car share location within a half mile. Okay. Next slide, please. So how much does it cost? So we have a couple examples, and we'll talk more about where they can sit on the lot and whatnot later on in some other slides. But so first is a 425 square foot detached accessory unit. So how much does it cost in the city? So the planning fees are nil. You get our someone like myself will look at your ADU plan and just ensure conformance with the code. Building and plan check and inspections fees is about $1,600. Public Works has their fees also. What I was probably gasping about is a park fee, and that's basically based on density of the development once you add the separate attached or detached unit on there. And that can vary depending upon the size of your lot or whatnot. The bigger the lot, the more expensive the fee is. The smaller the lot, the less expensive. So it varies. Other public works fees that were not included would be like encroachment fees if you have to add a sidewalk as part of your development, et cetera, et cetera. But those are too variable to add into that, and sometimes those fees can be zero depending on what the public works requirements are. In terms of school fees for additions or new developments, ADUs on lots that are under 500 square feet, there are no school fees, and that's a state regulation also. One thing I like to point out too is this is a great example of what a typical detached or even attached ADU looks like. You have a kitchenette, a bathroom, a bedroom, and a living area, and that's really the 3 things you have to provide: eating, sleeping, and a bathroom space for the person to have successful independent living. Okay, next slide, please. So, that was decided by council years ago in terms of having park fees for ADUs. Those park fees also for any type of new living, any type of new residential units in the city. So example B is more of a 720, I think it's a 700 plus square foot ADU right there. One of the things that people have the misconception about is that ADUs can only have 1 bedroom. No, they can have multiple bedrooms. They can have 2 bedrooms, and if you can fit 3 bedrooms, you can have 3 bedrooms in there too. So again, the three things you need to provide: bathroom, eating, and sleeping. And that's it. Building fees do go up for any type of addition or new ADU that's over 500 square feet, and that goes for any type of addition, even a new living room or a new garage and whatnot. Plan check inspection fees are a little bit more. Storm drain fees, park fees are basically about the same across the board, regardless of how big your ADU is. If you're adding a living unit on site, if it increases the density, then your fees do go up. School fees are triggered with any type of additions that are over 500 square feet, so there are some school fees attached to this thing. And next slide. So you can see the comparison of fees right there. And next slide after that. So I have the handout on this slide. I'm not going to go through every single one. Sure, go ahead. Yes. Again, these are all approximate fees too, so. I think we'll have them available.
Well,
yeah.
They will be.
Okay. Okay, I guess we can go.
You ready?
Yeah, next. Okay, so again, this is basically the handout that's on the slide. Like I said, I'm not gonna go through every single line on this. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions during the question and answer period after to talk about the specifics. So basically, which zones are ADUs allowed in? Basically, any single family residential zone, R1, RHS, A, and A1, they're allowed in too. Those are pretty much the single family zones in the cities and whatnot. Setbacks for detached ADUs vary depending upon the height of the structure itself. So the taller it is, the further setback has to be. The closest it can be to a side or rear yard setback is basically about 3 feet up to 15 feet. Again, it's all dependent upon the height of the structure that's facing the property line. Other than that, I think without getting too much into the weeds, I'll pass on to Greg.
You were giving an example of the 2,000 square foot and then the garage. Did you say you subtracted the square footage of the garage against the square footage of the house? Yeah.
So the question was about living space definition. So earlier in my presentation gave an example of a 2,000 square foot home where you have a 400 square foot garage. So when we calculate the living space, you take out the garage. And that's per the state's definition of living space.
So you're adding it and subtracting it?
Yeah, so you take it out, then if it's a 50% of that is the maximum you can do on your property against the other.
You're not subtracting the square footage of the garage from the square footage of the living space.
You're excluding the garage, correct. So it would be 1,600 square feet.
So I know we're going to have a lot of questions, and we will have time for this. So,
Does it need neighbors' approval?
No.
great. So our next speaker is Greg Popovich. This is my joke slide. We don't actually have the coach. Our next speaker is the good Greg Popovich, who is the co-founder of Gold Bar Builders, and originally a Cupertino native. Just before the meeting started, it turns out he grew up very close to where my house is today. Over his 30-year career in development, he's worked on a wide range of development projects with a recent focus on looking at housing affordability. Gold Bar is actively building ADUs today in San Jose, so he's very well positioned to talk about the challenges of building in the current environment. Please welcome Greg.
Hi, my name is Greg Popovich with Gold Bar Builders, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. As you can tell from the talk that's been going on tonight, ADUs are a very crucial part of solving some of these issues of affordable housing. Yet at the same time, they're not the easiest thing in the world to do. It sounds possibly overwhelming at times, and it's really not. And I would encourage you to look into it. And the reason I say that it's not overwhelming is I've been in the industry for 30 years. And being in the industry makes it to where this is much easier for me to navigate. And part of the things that are needed when you go through the process are plan sets, engineering, and different things like that. I'll actually read off what's needed: a plan set, Title 24 energy calculations, structural engineering, sometimes depending, soils engineering, truss calculations, and truss engineering. And when you go in with that package, you're able to go in and talk to a planner, possibly prior to that, in order to see if the ADU will fit on your lot, and then go through the process, through the permitting process, and then after you're done with that, start building. That's after you've done the design already as well. So it sounds like there's quite a bit to it, and there is. But what it does in the end unit, or the end result, is it provides another unit in the city that will allow teachers or local staff, people who can't afford to live in our area that work in our area, housing. So with that being said, the slide that's up currently shows, can you put Plan A up? A 480 square, it says 475 square foot house, but it's actually 480 square foot ADU. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, living room, and kitchen. This unit has been designed for a lot. It fits in a lot, many backyards, and it has advantages being under 500 square feet. Being under 500 square foot, there's some fee breaks, there's some things that make it more affordable. The unit itself, this one, particular one I'm building currently twice in San Jose, is very easy to build, and I've done a lot of the groundwork on it already. What's nice is I've been hearing construction times in the valley down here being anywhere between 6 months and 18 months. We should have this completed within a 4-month period, 120 days. And that's optimistic, I know, because if it rains, it's going to mess up my schedule. But if it doesn't rain, we'll definitely hit 120 days, looking at 150 days on the outside to have this unit from breaking ground through completion and having a tenant in your backyard, or a family member, caregiver, teacher, fireman, policeman. So the time frames to build these are not as long as you may think. The planning phase on going through the initial process of getting design and things like that usually takes the longest because we all want to put our input into it. So you come and you say, hey, Greg, I want to build a 500 square foot unit. I say, great, here's a couple plans that we can look at. Well, yeah, but I'd like the kitchen over here, and I'd like to do this, and I want to orient it that way. And by the time we're done, we've probably spent between 30 and 60 days on design. So figure about 30 to 60 days in the design period. From that point, we'll go into planning, and we'll talk to planning. They'll look at the plan, and they'll say, yeah, that would work in the backyard. That would be great, and that'll work. Then we go into the permitting process, which can take anywhere from a couple weeks all the way up to a couple months. By law, the new laws that passed that Senator Wachowski pushed through allow 120 days for plan review and permitting. That's for the first go around, and then you have a second go around, which is revisions, which is another 30-day period, which you can go into. Cupertino has been very nice in working with me and telling me that, Greg, we will try to push these through as soon as we possibly can. Actually, Cupertino's has some very incredible guidelines and things. The 10% of the lot size instead of not allowing ADUs is a phenomenal achievement. And Cupertino's been working very diligently to try to create opportunities to build in Cupertino these units, and haven't been skirting the rules as some of the other cities have been doing to make it very difficult to build. They've seen the need and the desire. It actually helps, as Rod brought up a little while ago, the RENA, which is a criteria that they need to reach. These ADU units will help the city. It'll also help the homeowner by generating additional income by having these units on their land, and it helps the tenant because these units are not available. There are not available units in the city, and we were hearing the prices before. In a little while, I'll go into a program, a special program that I'm putting together right now for teachers and working with some of the local districts that will allow teachers to have special accesses to these ADU units at a reduced rate. It's a phenomenal program. We'll go into that in just a little while. The difference in the units is the attached units that we were talking about, or JADUs, junior accessory dwelling units as they're called, are inside of the house frame. You're not adding additional square footage. So you're putting, if you have an extra living room, you're going to put a bathroom and a kitchen in there and possibly have it as a studio with a Murphy bed. The Murphy beds, by the way, if you start looking into ADUs, the Murphy beds are a phenomenal way to gain extra space. So keep that in mind, and if you end up talking to me on design or whatever, I'll tell you about some of the space-saving and energy-efficient designs that go into these. Everything that we're doing is designed and built on-site. We're not doing any type of prefabricated houses. We're doing 2x6 construction, and we're building them. We're putting quartz countertops in, hardwood floors. We're making them very nice. We want these to be nice units. We don't want them to be. When I hear affordable, I don't think of undesirable. I think of affordable, and that's what it's going to be, but it's also going to be nice in a place that we want to live. So on the attached or JADUs, There are some advantages that go along with that were spoke about a little bit earlier. On the detached ADUs, which I like the best, they're my favorite. I like to go out there and look at the different, I should probably switch slides while I'm going. Let's go.
Did you want to go to the plot?
Let's go to the plot plan, please. What this plot plan shows is it shows an ADU. This is currently what I'm building right now. It's in Willow Glen. We put the chamber's address on it, but it's actually in Willow Glen. And what you see is you see on the main diagram, that's the house. And we put a path on the left-hand side of the house, which takes you back to the ADU. That's the 480 square foot ADU that's in the back of the property. That unit, he's going to go along the affordable housing route, and that should rent around $2,400. And it's very nice. What's incredible about these units is that people can actually share them. So you can share them with your partner or with somebody that a new teacher that you've met who can't afford housing here also. But on this particular unit, you come into the garage, this is actually right behind the garage, and that's where that little notched area is. The AD is directly behind the garage. It leaves a area behind him for barbecue area, his dog, whatever it is that you want. Also keeps a private backyard for the property owner. So there's areas for both people to go and to enjoy and to live. So it's not an obtrusive type thing to where you come in and you're right on top of each other. It's a very nice situation to be created. And ADUs are being incorporated into landscaping and making the backyards in some instances very useful and actually very desirable. The attached unit, or the detached unit, similar to this one, I know that you're wondering about costs and building cost. Something of this size on that lot, you'd be looking somewhere between $135,000 and $150,000, excluding permits and fees. That's excluding. If you were to include it, you'd be somewhere around 165, right in that area there. In looking at the building costs on the unit, when you're building smaller, your costs don't go down because you still have the main components of the ADU, the main components being the kitchen, the bathroom, which happen to be the two most expensive components of any house. And you still have those. And then you have smaller square footage, so you don't get the benefit of volume. We can't add the benefit of volume into the cost of the ADU. So by not being able to do that, the costs on the ADUs are a little bit more per square footage than in building a traditional house. Because when you build a traditional house, a lot of times 2 bedrooms, or 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, kitchen. You still have that kitchen, you have that bathroom, you're adding an extra bathroom, but a whole bunch of inexpensive square footage as well on top of that when you're looking at a main house. Your returns, as I'll go into in just a minute, are phenomenal for ADUs, and they are a very incredibly good investment. Some of the hurdles that I'm working with Cupertino and other cities in the area are to help streamline the process. The process time does cost money because as the money gets tied up in the building of the ADUs, there's either interest or cost of money or a number of different things. So the faster we can get these put up and on your property, the faster you're able to rent the units out and to regain the monies that you've put out in as far as rent. And let's see, the units themselves, the long-term, I was asked to talk about some long-term considerations. Long-term considerations of the ADUs, once you age or get older, if you'd like to stay in your neighborhood, it works out in a number of ways. It could be used for a caregiver at that point. It could also be used for you to go and move into the ADU yourself, rent out the main house, and have a supplementary income that is huge and can add quite a bit to your Social Security income. So some of the long-term benefits, they're actually very nice, especially when you start looking into the sale of the unit, what it's done for property values and a number of things like that. And I'll be back in just a couple minutes to talk about the HATS program and the teacher assistance program that we're working on. Thank you.
Yep, we have a moment if you want to flip through. We can show the other slides.
You want to flip through?
Just an example of how they...
Did you go to the elevation slide, David?
Yeah. And then there's some elevations. These are elevations of how the this particular unit. This is an actual unit. These were actually taken from a real set of plans. So.
Yes, this is a plan set that we're doing again in Willow Glen. This one, we matched the architecture of the ADU to the architecture of the main structure. In this particular instance, he had board and batten on top and then lap siding on the bottom of his house. And so we matched the architecture and the look of this ADU to his house. So when you go, it flows very nicely. It's not like having a box next to a beautiful arched facility. If there was arches, then the ADU would have some arches worked into the property as well. So the ADUs match architecturally to the structures that go in there. And if you flip to the next slide, it'll show just some of the side views and elevations on there.
Yeah.
And then that's good.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, we started to talk a little bit about the finances of how to make this work. So there are those questions. How do I finance this? How does an ADU affect my home value or look like an investment? So I'd like to welcome next Kevin McClellan. Kevin is a financial advisor and a licensed investment advisor with Leeward Financial, located here in Cupertino. Kevin serves on the board of directors of the Cupertino Chamber of Commerce and received the Business Advocate of the Year award from the Silicon Valley Chamber of Commerce. Please welcome Kevin.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. You guys could already begin to see as they're discussing the different aspects of auxiliary dwelling units, how you might benefit from it. I think you guys can always, as you're imagining and thinking about it, realize that your property values may go up, that there are some options for you as you become older of either moving into the auxiliary dwelling unit or having a caregiver. So there's a lot of different fiscal impacts. And the first thing that I would say is that at every point in this journey, it's very important that you get very specific advice based on your particular circumstances. And so where we would begin with this is starting off and making sure that you have a designer and a builder that understand the codes and the fees of what happens in Cupertino. If you want to talk about an expedited process to get this done more quickly and save you time and money, having somebody that's familiar with the process, familiar with the city, that can help navigate that will more than save you money that you may spend by spending a little bit more money by getting a more qualified designer. So if you've got a nephew in design school and you think that they can help you with this, the truth is you might save some money on the design, but you may never get it built. So it's really important that you get a team of experts to help you along the way, and it's very important that you do this. It will actually impact all the financial value and all of the other things that will happen along with the dwelling unit. In addition to that, you're going to need whoever you have a banking relationship with, or if you're going to try to get a loan from a different organization, there will be a loan officer. You need to understand the types of loans that you can get, the interest rates that you're going to pay, how you pay that back, if there's any pre-penalty for paying it off early, and a lot of the things around that you typically look at with loans. And once again, those are going to vary on your individual circumstances, based on financial scores, based on the value of your home and things of that nature. As we go through the process of looking at the different options for the future of the financial impact for your auxiliary dwelling unit, there's a few things that you need to do and you might want to do. And once again, talking to a tax professional and a financial professional is really important, because if at the end of all this you would like to sell the property and move out of the area, there are a few things that you need to do. And an example of that would be that Greg was talking about renting the property. Well, if you're renting the property, you need to report that as income. And if you report that as income, you also get tax advantages along with that, have it being as any commercial rental property would be. Now, another benefit of this, if you do this correctly, is at the time of the sale, you can actually take the percentage of your property that has been that auxiliary dwelling unit and transfer that in what's called a 1031 exchange and get it into another property that can generate income, and that would be in addition to your either 254 a single deduction at the time of sale, or $500,000 for a married couple that you get from your tax deduction. So there's a lot of financial impacts. And I know I'm going through this quickly, but the whole point is for you to understand that you're going to need a tax professional, you're going to need a real estate professional, you're going to need a financial professional, but more importantly, if you're even thinking about building this, you're going to need to have real good design and build professionals that really understand the local territory. So once again, I've gone through that quickly because I think that we can answer more specifics as we get through, but the only last thing that I would say is one of the things that Greg mentioned was the reverse. If you actually moved into the auxiliary dwelling unit for a few years and rented the main home, which is larger, your 1031 exchange is a lot larger, and that would impact the money that you would be able to deduct eventually from your taxes at the time of sale if you're interested in that as well. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and that's why if there's only one thing you get from me in regards to this, is that you really do need to make sure that you get answers that are really specific to what is happening with your situation so that you can get the maximum benefit and actually get this done correctly. So I hope that was helpful.
We'll come back and we'll get questions in a moment. We're actually going to pop back and have Greg talk a little bit more about a program that he's actually working on to help with the financing of ADU construction.
Councilman Sinks hit it right on the head just a little while ago. Teachers are having a serious problem right now, and we're losing teachers at a rapid rate. One of the local districts lost up to 28% of their teachers. Luckily, it wasn't the Cupertino district, but the local district that's very close to us lost 28% of their teachers last year to other areas. And that's a staggering amount. What we need to do to keep the teachers here is to provide housing. Housing is the #1 problem and what's making them move away. So what I'm working on with some of the local school districts is a fund. It's called the HATS Fund. It's Housing Affordability for Teacher Stability. And the HATS Fund is marrying private sponsorship with homeowners with teachers. So the private sponsorship creates the fund, or the funding mechanism, in which to fund the building of ADUs on private residences' properties. The private residents, in turn, for a favorable rate and favorable terms, offers to sign a contract that they will offer that property to teachers for a 10-year period or whatever is established through the districts to house a teacher at 75 to 80% of market value. So the program, the HATS program, is designed to keep the teachers in the area, allow the teachers to come to the area and use our local schools and school districts to use that as a recruitment tool in order to bring teachers to the area and not lose them to outside areas, outside states, outside counties that aren't as impacted as Silicon Valley. So the HATS program, right now we're currently pursuing corporate sponsors. So if you happen to know of any, please call. And we'll be putting that together, and it will be funding ADUs for teachers. We have a goal of doing 60 over the next 18 to 24 months. And for that, we'll need $10 million. So that's what we're currently going to fund the HATS program with, and that's the goal that we're going to obtain. Once that's obtained, we will be building under that program. Now, until that program's funded, the HATS philosophy can still be implemented. And what I mean by that is any of the local property owners can still house a teacher, go under the HATS program, offer the ADU to a teacher for 75 to 80% of the value for a 10-year contract as a regular community member interested in housing teachers could do. So even without the HATS program fully implemented and funded, the program for teachers can still start today, and we could start to move this forward. And as we talked about earlier, the time frame to build these units, we could have housing for teachers in as little as 6 months and make a dent and an impact. So that's something that we need to sit there and address and look at as well. Not just the economic impacts to ourselves, which are great with ADUs, but the economic impacts we can have for those that are raising and educating our children to supply workers to these companies in the area. And the program is ready to go. The school districts that I've talked to in Cupertino so far, I still need one more to talk to, have all been very supportive and very eager to sit there and to have this program launched immediately. So that's the HATS program in a nutshell. And
Thank you very much. We're going to go into the question and answer session now. So one of the things we'll do, Rick has a microphone so we can capture these on you know, in the TV broadcast. So if you could raise your hand, we'll come over and you can ask a question to anybody on the panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. Thank you, members of council. Unfortunately, what I see, everybody is talking about that ADU is the best in our community, but I don't see why they have, or let me ask you this, if it is restricted to zoning single family home, why is not extended to multiple family as well? As a matter of fact, I think multiple family zoning Z3 is a better candidate for these ADUs because by its name, it's multiple family. So if everything else is according to the requirement of zoning and requirement of setback, requirement, everything is confirmed, why Z3 zoning is excluded from this? Thank you.
Anybody want to?
Yeah, I can answer it then. Okay. Whoever wants to jump in. You know,
You can both answer.
Yeah, we can both answer. You know, accessory dwelling units are really meant to be ancillary to a primary use. So that's why they're primarily, they're only allowed to be located in R1 single family zones because they're ancillary. In fact, if you look at our size restrictions, they can't be more than 50%. It's not meant to be the primary use on the property. Primary use is the single family home with this ancillary accessory dwelling unit on the property. If you allow an ADU on a multifamily lot, like a duplex, even like an R2, R3, then it becomes part of the primary use. And you know, you have a duplex, instead of a duplex now you have a triplex, and instead of a triplex now you have a fourplex and stuff like that too. And once you go beyond the single family zoning districts, you become beholden to density restrictions also too. So I mean, hopefully that answers your question in terms of the methodology behind it.
I'm sorry, let me make it very specific.
We just have limited time.
I have a 12,000, I have a lot of 12,000 square feet. And I have a duplex with a, backyard of 5,000 square feet unused. It's just 5,000 square feet sitting there. And now you are talking about, using the land and, efficiently. Why can't I put another ADU in that 5,000 square feet?
So one of the reasons we're using the microphone is so everyone can ask their question, everyone can hear it, and we can share the information. In the time available, we're undoubtedly not going to be able to answer everyone's question to the full extent that they would wish, but we want to answer as many questions as we can. So thank you for raising your hand. Thank you for using the microphone. And you, sir, are the next question.
Actually, Rick, before we do that, I think Rod actually wanted to comment on that as well.
Yeah, so, we have, ADUs are one tool in our toolbox, right? So I talked a little bit about the Hamptons earlier. We have 342 apartments that will become 942 apartments. So exactly how that's done, in their case, there's nowhere to go but up. They will take down those 342 units and erect 942. But I think every case has to be looked at individually. This program is streamlined and simplified for those simplest of cases, right, where we have a single family home. But, we're doing projects of greater density and getting redevelopment done in the city all the time, right? So it's just that when things get not as cookie cutter, we have to consider applications against both zoning, density, and all these other factors, and so it gets a little more complex. The whole point of this program is to make it really simple and as easy as possible for folks to do in this one particular case. And that was the state's intention. But yeah, rest assured, right, that if I get 15% inclusionary housing for all income levels in a project of 942 units, we're making a big contribution. So but that's obviously a more complex tool than the ADU.
Okay. Thank you. We have another question here.
Are there restrictions to who you could rent it to? Or to that extent, can you use the unit for Airbnb?
There are no restrictions to my knowledge.
No, there aren't. Airbnb is a fun one for us on staff.
At your own risk.
Well, the city has a transient occupancy tax, right? We collect 12%, something like that.
Yes.
From every hotel room for every night of occupancy. And you know, you go to another city and you pay this tax and you go, what's all this? And yeah, that's the local jurisdiction collecting money. Most cities now are working, if they haven't, to ensure that Airbnb is also collecting that tax. Yeah.
So,
Great. We have another question in the back.
So the question that I have is with regard to the property taxes. If I have a detached ADU or an attached one, when I build that, yeah, how does it affect my property tax? Does the entire home get reevaluated at the current price, or just the extension, or how does it work?
It shouldn't be the entire home, but I mean, it will increase the value of the home, and therefore it will generate a new assessment. So that's once again one of the very good points that why you need to have somebody so you can really assess what the true cost and benefit and return on that investment's going to be.
Maybe in conjunction with that question, were there any other areas that had to, any other concerns related to having part of your house be, effectively a business property?
Well, there's some tax breaks, but yeah, it requires, you doing a separate, you have to handle it as an investment property on your taxes, and that's really the biggest key and most important part, so that you can receive all the benefits of what that unit can do for you. And then once again, if you were to actually flip it and live in the ADU and then have the larger home, you'd want to make sure that that was adjusted on your taxes as well, and that's really very crucial to being able to receive any future shelter benefits from like a 1031 exchange.
Mm-hmm. I have one comment and a question. The point about teachers, I think it's very real. My elementary school teacher did move to Marine for the same reason. So I think this is an important point. And my question is, can a basement in a home be considered an ADU?
Yes, you can use a basement, but it's still beholden to the standards, the size limitations, and whatnot.
You need separate access, you need a bathroom, and you need a kitchen.
Another question in the back?
Yeah, you brought up the transient occupancy tax. So I believe Cupertino doesn't collect that tax on short-term rentals yet. So were you looking into negotiating a voluntary collection agreement with Airbnb or a registry system or anything like that to get that tax?
You bet.
You mentioned something about 15% that any project being built, whether it's housing or something else, would have to pay toward affordable housing, or that they're remitting it for that. Is Cupertino getting that 15% from the Big Apple development?
Well,
and if so, how many dollars would that bring in toward affordable housing?
So our 15% inclusionary housing requirement is for housing projects, but it basically means if you're building housing of any kind that's multifamily housing, we're looking for 1 unit in 15 to be for below market rate folks, and there are different categories of that. And I won't go into all the details of that here, but that's part of a bill that moved through the legislature this year, gave us the power to insist on 15%, which has long been the city's ordinance on rental units, which hasn't been true the last few years because of a court decision. So it's called the Palmer Fix, and gives us the ability to, on multifamily housing, ensure that there's one below market rate unit, or 15%, I'm sorry, not 1 in 15, 15%.
Did I misunderstand then what you said earlier? Is that 15% on any project, whether it's housing or something else? Or
No, so there are two tools. One is 15% inclusionary housing in a multifamily project. So it doesn't apply to single family homes, okay? The second tool we have is a housing mitigation fee. And that housing mitigation fee is paid across multifamily residential, by multifamily residential developers, as well as retail developers, as well as office developers, as well as hotel developers. So there's a fee that goes from $10 a square foot to 25, right, depending on the kind and density and so forth. And we use those monies collected on an office project, say, to then help subsidize housing, so to provide that below market rate housing for teachers and folks that make less than teachers.
Actually, so
did Cupertino get that kind of money from the Apple development?
yeah, actually, I think Rod, one of the things she may be asking here is there was actually a payment into the Affordable Housing Fund by Apple, and I believe it's been used as well.
Yeah, so we've long had this fee. We raised it just a year and a half ago to very substantial levels. It used to be pretty small. And then in consideration of the fact that we couldn't collect we had lost our ability to do inclusionary housing in multifamily rentals, we upped these fees, right, across all kinds of developments. So these newer fees that I've talked about in the $10 to $25 range were raised after the Apple entitlement in 2013.
Yes.
But yes, Apple did pay into that fund.
I have a question about the lot coverage restrictions. Currently, Cupertino has an 35% of the lot size?
45.
45?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if for example, if there is a 10,000 square feet lot, and the main house already like 45,000 square feet, if we build a detached ADU in the backyard, is still a problem?
That's one of the problems we're facing a lot in this city, is that a lot of the new homes that are being built out are maxed out. They come in, they scrape this home that's 15% of the lot, and rebuilding a house that's 44.8% of the lot. So if you want to do an ADU, you can't do it detached. You can't even do any additional square footage. You have to do an internal conversion at that point. So that's, one of the things when the state came out with the legislation last year was they had all these incentives, ability to use, but they still left a lot of things to local jurisdictions to control. One of the things is lot coverage, floor area ratio, setbacks, to name a few. So yes.
You mean 45 is a one-story house, right? If it's a two-story house, it's 35, is that right?
It's 45% across the board. So lot coverage is 45%, but we only count the building footprint. But floor area ratio is the key for multi-story development.
So the lot coverage is still the same. We cannot go over the 45% limit.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I had kind of a specific question. Mm-hmm. If you have a more efficient access to another road, are you allowed to use that plumbing and water line if it is cheaper for the homeowner instead of running it from where their main, just my family's property is on a hill, so mm-hmm. it would be much more difficult for us if we had to run a line up the hill to where our home is, if we could build down where the other road access is. So that's what the question I basically have.
I can't answer that. That's it's out my planning mind. I don't see why not, but that's a question you can definitely get in touch with our public works department. They can.
And if it does have a separate road access, is it still an ADU, or do we get pushed into another category?
It's still an ADU.
Okay, thank you.
There's some very patient people on this side of the room.
I have a couple of questions. Number one, did we have this 1,000 square feet early on as 1,200 square feet? Did we change this?
We did. So as I mentioned in my presentation, we did come back a few times to amend the amended ordinance. And so.
And the tenants, when they're there, how do they prove residency for Cupertino schools?
I don't know.
Well, typically they'll get an address. So, you know, their address will be a Cupertino address.
So they will get their PG&E and all those separate?
It depends on how it's done, but I don't think that they typically will have a separate one, but they'll have other bills and other things that are sent there. You know, they'll have their Visa bill sent there. They'll have other, you know, their car registration and things of that nature will come to their home address. So,
speaking as the parent of a school child, they often will ask for a rental agreement as proof of your residency. So I think you should be covered in any case.
And one of the things, so you're not required to have separate utilities or separate address even if you have an ADU, but it's strongly encouraged to do so, you know, as part of the process.
Great. Next question.
Relative to if the house is if the ADU is attached or detached, how does that affect when I go to resell my home? If I've got it attached, I'm assuming that I can say, well, it used to be a let's say a 2,000 square foot home, and now it's a 2,400 square foot home. If it's detached, I still have to say I'm selling a 2,000 square foot home. So is it better for me to say I've got a 2,400 square foot home, or do I say
you probably would want to list it as both and actually acknowledge that it has the separate detached unit. For a lot of people, that does become an attractive scenario. You know, just as I was talking earlier about you 1031 exchanging out, there are people that might be able to 1031 exchange into your property.
But technically, my house is, if I do it as attached, my main home is still going to be the 2,000 square
right,
foot.
so you would list them separately. So your home is 2,000 and the ADU's 500.
Well, you sell it together, right? So there.
You would sell.
Presumably, it's one listing.
You have to sell them together.
Right.
You would just
Right.
list
Yeah, 'cause
them
it's one
separately.
APN. Yeah.
The listing would have them listed separately. That you'd have a separate unit of that square footage on the property.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Is that okay? Relative to getting tenants in, if I don't get a teacher or something like that, I'm assuming that all the California tenant landlord laws apply.
Yes.
Thank you.
You know, we could also talk about the fact that I have an aging mother, and many of us have aging parents, and having a unit we might not rent out for some time, or might make available to a parent or parents could be a real attraction to families in this area.
Hi. First of all, this idea to make housing more affordable for teachers is a very noble one. Kudos on that. So question is there an upper limit to the size of the ADU in terms of square footage? And secondly, when you position something as an ADU, does it ease any restriction on setbacks on a R1 property?
So your question is the setbacks easier for an ADU relative to a principal dwelling? Yes, it's like I said, an ADU is based on the setbacks for a side and rear yard for an ADU are basically established by the wall height, exterior wall height that's facing the property. So for example, the total height of an ADU could be 12 feet at the top of the roof, but slant down to like 7 feet. That's facing like your neighbor, and that can be as close as, and that can be like a 3-foot setback. But let's say that you have like a half an A-frame home, and that the higher part is 15 feet and it's facing your neighbor, that has to be set back 15 feet.
Got it. So it does basically relax those restrictions, basically, than a typical single residence, single family property.
Yeah, it's really a sliding scale. It's if you go to 19.100 on the municipal code, there's an illustration that shows you that sliding scale.
Got it. So on the first part of the question was on an urban zone property. Is there an upper limit to the ADU size? For example, if you had enough room on the lot to be able to accommodate 2 bedrooms, for example, what is the upper limit of the square footage you can go up to?
Well, the upper limit for any ADU in the city is 1,000 square feet, but then there's other factors too, and it's always whichever's more restrictive. So it's either 10% of your lot or half the livable area of your home up to 1,000 square feet. Now, another thing to take note also, and it's in this handout, is if you have a detached ADU and it's obviously not all the time, but 99% of the time it's gonna be in your backyard, the ADU cannot occupy more than 30% of the rear yard area also. So really you have 4 things that limit the size of your detached ADU.
Earlier you said something about 45% restriction on the total square footage.
Right.
Is that even in a multi-story thing?
Yes.
So as we're talking about setbacks, there are a number of variations in how houses in the community adhere to those setbacks based on when they were built. How are variances handled when you are surrounded by people that don't meet current code and you're trying to apply one of these or build one of these ADUs and you're trying to meet the community standard, but the setbacks restrictions for your specific property don't meet, or the current rules don't meet what everyone else in the area has used. For an example, if you have a corner lot, by definition, you have to have 15-foot setbacks on both sides. But you have an existing garage that has a 3-foot setback on one side. And 3 other houses in the neighborhood also have a 3-foot setback on a corner lot. Is that something you can apply for in a variance, or are they enforcing the current rules strictly?
The findings for variance are very strict. I think the last time the city approved a variance was probably about 4 years ago, and before that, probably 4 or 5 years before that too. So the threshold to make those findings are very high, and to have the variance, typically there has to be something geographically complicating your lot or development on that lot, or there's a shape of the lot that's so awkward that prevents you from full enjoyment of your property. We handle these things on a case-by-case basis and whatnot too. If we feel free to speak with myself, or either after this meeting or tomorrow, or shoot me an email and we can discuss it further.
I have a concern about how it impacts the neighborhood with street parking. You provide the parking place, but there's no guarantee that they park there. And you may rent it to 1 or 2 people, but I've noticed rentals where people keep moving in, and there may be, a house across the street from me is rented, and there are 8 cars associated with that house. And it starts looking pretty trashy when all down the street, the cars. How is that going to be handled?
Well, we do have code enforcement in the city that's very reactive if someone files a complaint. One of the tough things to discuss with someone like yourself, not someone like yourself, that came out wrong, but one of the tough things to realize is that it is a public street and people do have a right to park there. There are time limits. If they're there for the same cars there parked for 4 or 5 days in a row without moving, that's a violation of the ordinance. I believe it's 72 hours ordinance in terms of the length of stay. But if there are 8 cars being parked because of a single family home they're renting, that could also be a violation too, in terms of the amount of people living there, if they're Airbnb or if they're just like we've had a lot of code cases with Airbnbs where you have 8 different renters living there, constantly changing after a few days and whatnot. At a certain point, that doesn't become an ancillary use, that becomes a primary use, and you're essentially running a hotel. So if there are some concerns, definitely call city staff and we can take a look into it.
We have a question over there.
Yes, I have a question about helping the teachers. If I build an ADU and we don't have a HAT program or something like that in effect, but I want to try to rent it out, is there any incentive for me to rent it out at 75%, or is that just being a good guy and giving up 25%?
There's a number of incentives, as we talked earlier. Specific incentives, you're being a good guy. And we definitely will appreciate that. And I can get you a teacher almost virtually instantly that will take your ADU once it's built. The HATS program is, once again, to facilitate that and to facilitate getting financing when financing is difficult for some people to get for the ADU construction. So to answer your question, no, you'd be definitely being a good guy at this point, and we would definitely love to talk to you about renting that out from you.
I could say, although we haven't gone there, I mean, to this point, right? This money we collect under the program I previously talked about, we might consider, we'd have to take council action, but one of the things we could consider is providing a subsidy to augment what you're doing with HATS.
So I'm interested in putting an ADU in the front of my house. And when I've looked online in the past, there have been some, at the guidelines and everything that Cupertino has, I remember there being some restrictions as far as where the entrance could be faced, and I don't see that necessarily on your sheet tonight. So has that changed, or are there restrictions as far as where I can place the entrance, street facing or towards my house?
The bottom entryways, all accessory dwellings shall be screened from public street. I mean, typically the easiest way to accomplish that is just put on the side of the home. It hasn't changed since, yeah.
Other questions? People who have not yet asked questions.
Hi, I have a daughter. She has got Down syndrome. She lives in a low-income apartment, but we are not happy with the situation. So we thought maybe we can add above our garage and like a small studio or something. Is there any incentive for that?
Well, let's first talk about the zoning. We don't typically, is it an existing second story above the garage, or are you going to be adding a new story on top of the garage?
Actually, it's a tri-level house, but then the garage is on one side. There is nothing on the top of the garage.
Okay, so we don't allow second story ADUs unless you're converting an existing second story to an ADU. So that's...
There is nothing above the garage.
Okay.
Which doesn't mean you couldn't apply for a regular building permit to modify the home, correct?
Yeah, you could add a second story for sure, but to have it as to add a second story specifically to have it as a separate unit.
It's not separate. It's going to be attached to the building, next to the It's a tri-level house, but then the garage is next to the house.
Okay.
Attached to the house.
Okay.
It probably wouldn't be an ADU. It would be an addition, and you could probably do that. You just have to go through the building process. Yeah.
Right. But since my daughter, she has got Down syndrome, and we want her to have her own place, is there any incentive for that?
Specifically, I mean, I don't know of any.
Not financial. It sounds like your family would benefit from it, and that sounds like a good incentive, but there isn't any resources, if that's what you're saying, that I'm aware of.
Actually, the things we are trying to do, some of the parents trying to do low-income places for the people with the special needs.
Sorry, anyone who has not asked a question yet?
Just naive, is attached ADU in the future can convert back to a single dwelling, or what it takes to do that?
Building permit. and then building permit, and then there could be some situations where typically we only allow one kitchen in a single-family home. And that's per the definition of a single-family home. So if you're going to connect the two, you'd have to probably do some modifications, like get rid of the kitchen, specifically most of the kitchen. Yeah.
We had another question over here.
Where do I go to get a rezoning of my piece of property? I'm zoned RHS. I think it probably has the same zoning as a Chilean copper mine because because you can remove 2,500 square yards of dirt. That's enough for a 3-story garage, 75 feet deep, and 75 feet deep, and you don't need a building permit. You can put that dirt in the front yard, or take it over to the neighbors, or maybe throw it in the street or something like that. So. And other things is they say, hey, make it 200 feet per inch when you send a blueprint in. Well, I could put that on the back of a postage stamp, so on my entire lot, because it's 200 by 180. Other things that are ridiculous are just the same. It's like, it just goes on and on. Nobody in the planning department knows how RHS and how difficult it is to get zoning. My lot is 35,000 square feet. And they use the garage too as part of that 3,000 square feet. The neighbor next door across the street just recently put in, and you know that, for 9,000 square feet. He has a lot size half of mine, his slope is half of mine, and here I probably could have used, you know, I could put then, therefore, if I had the same zoning as him, I could have put in 18,000 square feet. My home's less than 3,000 square feet. That way I could have had six kitchens and 6 living rooms and 24 bathrooms and 31 bedrooms and things like that. He's zoned R1. His lot is a lot more steep than mine. What we live is on a canyon. His is on one side, mine's on the other side. This is back when when they called those people our mayor. In 2005, rezoned our property, and what he did is he made it incredibly difficult. He made his very easy to do, and of course we voted him out of office, but now we're stuck with that. How do we get new zoning for our properties?
Are we sticking to ADUs?
Well, perhaps there's a council member, former mayor here. There's a person in the planning department. I think personally, I would start with them, and I'm sure they could help direct that discussion into the most productive direction.
For future question, is there an email address that we can send to and ask?
I brought a whole stack of cards, so you can have mine.
Also, we'll have a email address that we're setting up for this. For people who have questions about this this workshop tonight, you can send a message there, and we'll route it to the right person to make sure it gets back to you. But there are people who have cards here as well.
Well, I go back to my case. I have a duplex with lot size of 12,000 square feet. And if I add an ADU of 450, my lot coverage barely is 35%, not 45, 35%. So I think this is not fair, and this is kind of discrimination. Why are Z2 and Z3 zoning are not included in this ADU? This is, I can understand it.
I can answer at least part of that question. You know, ADUs, accessory dwelling units, are state regulations. So it's not just cities. So all cities within the state of California have to follow the same, have to be consistent with the state definition, which is basically single-family districts. You know, ADUs are part of a single-family district. It means the ancillary use to the primary residence of the house.
Yeah, so the point is, right, ADUs offer, if you fall into the ADU category, there are a bunch of advantages, streamlining and other things. All the things we've talked about up here. The city of Cupertino regularly allows property owners to redevelop their property, right? And so this is only one tool. If you want to do other kinds of things, additions or modifications, you go talk to experts in the planning department and they walk you through what's possible, right? You can work with an architect or somebody who's experienced in doing business with the city to help you. And you know, if you need help with financing, you go to somebody like Kevin who can help you work through all the tax consequences. So there are lots of different ways to do what you may want to do. If you fall into the ADU category, you know, there are some special incentives, and those basically have come down from the state. We have a particular implementation of that, and that's specifically what we're talking about tonight. But it doesn't prohibit anybody from coming in with a development application for something that doesn't look like an ADU or doesn't meet that definition.
There was one question I think that's probably useful for the people who may watch this tape in the future. How do you get more information if you don't know what your current lot coverage is, what your, how do you get the information so that you can find out whether you can go down the route of building an ADU?
Well, contact staff. I mean, that's pretty much easy. We're very, very available, emailing either via email or phone, or you just come down to the City Hall. There's always a planner on duty that can answer your questions. On our website, cupertino.org, if you go through the Community Development Department's webpage, there's links to interactive maps that not only tell you what we have, at least through the county's records, the size of your home and the lot and whatnot. We also have slope percentages that can calculate approximately what your slope percentage is if you're in an RHS parcel to figure out your potential build out of your site. Proceed with caution in terms of your lot size too. I mean, Rancho, those are rectangular lots. Sometimes some of them are even square. When you go to other parts of the city, particularly older parts of the city where the lots are irregular shape, the county's records that we pull from aren't always 100% accurate. So the only really way you can see how large your lot is by getting a civil survey done or a boundary survey, which will show your easements and whatever else on there. They're not the cheapest. They're not cheap. They're ranging anywhere between $1,500 to $5,000. But there's really the only way to guarantee how big your lot actually is and actually how big your house is too.
Great.
I will say that our planning staff is an award-winning staff. We regularly receive kudos from developers doing small projects and large in the city. Very helpful, very accessible. If you have questions, you can go right downstairs in City Hall and talk to somebody, and they can, give you the resources or the tools you need and provide the advice. But you should know, compared to some other large cities nearby, for example, we regularly, the council regularly gets reports of how effective our staff is in helping move things forward.
We're down to the last few minutes, so I don't know if you had any final comments that you wanted to make. It's optional from the panel.
Actually, I want to repeat a comment that Kevin had made about how to save money, and his comment was hire a great architect or a great designer, someone who's qualified. And I can't tell you how often we see unqualified designers or architects just eat up their clients' time because they don't know how to do the research, or they just don't want to do the research too. Fortunately, as staff, we're not allowed to give recommendations, but my biggest recommendation is you get what you pay for sometimes, and so you actually even though you might put more money up front, you tend to save more money in the end.
Any other?
Yeah, and I reiterate what I said earlier. Make sure that you're getting some expert help. You can see that there's a lot of moving parts in this. It's not, it is simplified in being able to do it, and you can visualize it and see, how it might impact your property. But there are enough moving parts that you really want to make sure you're talking to several people that have some expertise in this area, from taxes to real estate to design and building. to really make sure that you don't end up making a mistake. You know, we've all seen that movie, The Money. Well, I don't know if we all have, but there's that movie called The Money Pit, where you throw more money after more money. And I'd really like to see you guys avoid that. And the best way to avoid that is just to really have a good plan and have some good advisors that are giving you accurate information based on your specific needs and goals, and then allowing you to really evaluate if this is really going to work for you, and if it really does fit on your property and in your life.
Any others? All right. Well, I thank you so much for attending the workshop tonight. I hope it was informational. If you have questions about the material you saw here today, the Chamber of Commerce will make the slide presentation available on their website. But if you have other questions, you can write to, we set up a special email address. It's adu@cupertino-chamber.org. Send a message there, and we will route it to the appropriate party and get you an answer for your questions. I want to thank again the City of Cupertino and the Cupertino Chamber of Commerce, as well as the City Channel staff for making this event great. Thank you very much, and good evening.